Thank you for joining us for our CKPG News special, We Remember. Even though Remembrance Day signifies the end of the First World War, the day is still relevant for families of those who have served in the armed forces. November 11th remains a time for Canadians to honor and remember those who have made sacrifices. For one local family, it's an opportunity to share their story about the importance of the day.
Beautiful little redhead. He challenged life all the time and was very mischievous, curious little fellow.
Darren Fitzpatrick grew up playing Little League, snowboarding, and playing here in Prince George. In 2006, when he was just 18 years old, he made a decision that shocked his family. He was going to join the armed forces.
It was a total surprise for us because it wasn't something that he had talked about. When we reflected after the fact, it seemed to us that it made sense because of Darren's nature. He loved the camaraderie, he loved helping other folks, other people, especially the less fortunate. So in hindsight, it was a good fit. But when he told us at first, we were totally surprised. And of course, we tried to make some suggestions of some other careers that we thought would be good for him, but he was pretty determined.
Darren was posted in Afghanistan, and while he couldn't tell his family much about his experiences, he was proud of the work he was doing. In 2010, he was injured by an improvised explosive device and brought to hospital in Germany in critical condition.
We were hopeful when we got there, but we were told to expect the worst. So when we arrived, Darren was in pretty critical condition. And initially it was just Jim and I that went. And the second day, the boys were flown over and met with Darren there. So I think having the three boys together was very helpful. Darren actually regained consciousness and spoke to us. We were able to talk to him and share our feelings and our emotions with him. So we spent 2 weeks with him before he was actually flown home to Edmonton. It was probably the most precious 2 weeks that you can imagine. A lot of parents didn't have that opportunity.
Just a day after touching down on home soil, Darren passed away at just 21 years old. Now, Remembrance Day holds a different kind of significance for the Fitzpatricks.
It's the ultimate sacrifice. And so out of all the dates, Christmas, birthdays, anniversaries, Remembrance Day is probably the most difficult. We remember not only Darren, but all of his comrades and the other people that have put their lives on the line and not come back. And we like to remember his comrades and those that fought and came back. And they sacrificed as well, right? They're changed when they come home.
In 2016, Colleen was named the Silver Cross Mother. She laid the wreath in Ottawa's Remembrance Day ceremony, and in 2017 attended the service in Passchendaele. This year is the first time she's been in the city for the ceremony since 2015.
To stand at the War Memorial on Remembrance Day and just reflect on what that means, it was the most humbling experience. It was an honor beyond words.
But every day is Remembrance Day for the Fitzpatricks. Once a month, Colleen and her husband bring treats for the kids, playing at Corporal Darren Fitzpatrick Bravery Park, and they share his story.
Part of what I think is so important is to keep people remembering and keep the young generation engaged.
Kendall Robertson, CKPG News.
It's a somber occasion used to remember those who have sacrificed much so that we can enjoy the freedoms we do today. But Remembrance Day is steeped with traditions, everything from how to wear a poppy to the parade of colors.
In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place.
Written in 1915 by Canadian Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, In Flanders Fields symbolizes the end of the Great War. The poem was inspired by the poppies that grew at the site of those horrific battles where thousands of men were killed.
The poppy is a symbol of remembrance, and it's a memory of sacrifice. And this comes from the Great War, the First World War. And the origins of the poppy go back to Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae's poem, In Flanders Fields. This poem was the inspiration for Moyna Bell Michael, who was an American educator who volunteered with the YMCA and wanted to do something to commemorate sacrifice. And she was inspired by McCrae's poem, and she resolved to make and distribute poppies as a means of providing a memory of that sacrifice of the soldiers in the Great War.
That symbol was then embraced by Madame Guérin of France, who advanced the poppy as a tool to raise funds for orphans left behind after the war. In 1921, the Great War Veterans Association took up the poppy as a symbol of remembrance. Today, its sales support veterans and their dependents.
And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below.
I think people have developed traditions of their own ideas of what accounts for respect. And the Royal Canadian Legion has said that what the poppy should be done is worn on the left side in an appropriate and respectful way. You can wear it any time of year as long as it's done respectfully. We wear poppies frequently at the funeral services for veterans or other commemorative events when the wearing of a poppy is there to promote remembrance.
The poppy is traditionally worn from the last Friday in October to the closing of the commemoration ceremonies. Some choose to leave it at the cenotaph as a sign of respect.
We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields.
But there's another tradition around Remembrance Day, the parade, and it comes with a great deal of pomp and ceremony.
The orders of march and parades are long established matters of military tradition. Traditionally, in Remembrance Day parades, the veterans are the primary focus. You sometimes see bands leading, followed by an honor guard and color party with the primary position of honor going to veterans. Then you would see the various service elements in order of seniority. In general terms, that means the Navy goes first. Those Army units in order of seniority would go next, and then the Air Force and then other auxiliary units would follow behind.
This is the committee that organizes the parade each year. While it is more of a community event, it holds on to those military elements.
The Legion leads off at the head of the parade with the veterans. Then we have B Company of the Rocky Mountain Rangers that follows them, RCMP, and then ultimately the cadet units, Sea, Army, Air, and then contingents of guides, brownies, Girl Scouts, Cubs, etc., following at the very end.
They're invited. You identify groups that have got traditions that are in community groups that support remembrance, and they're part of it. You see, for example, the RCMP has traditionally formed the honor guard for our Remembrance Day services in Prince George. So they play a huge role in that. You see community groups like Scouts, Cubs, Guides, Brownies, and so on, Sparks, all playing a role, again, in their seniority of their various groups.
Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high.
Historically, it's maintained pretty much the same column of route or organization on the parade route. However, with the introduction of B Company, the reserve unit here, we juggled that a little bit.
But there may be change coming to the local parade, one tried recently by another branch of the Legion.
There's an idea put forth by one of the legions in Ontario whereby citizens that had fathers, grandfathers, sons that are deceased could actually parade as well, carrying their medals and or pictures of them in the parade route and up to the cenotaph.
If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Cheryl Jan, CKPG News.
Next on We Remember, the local Air Cadets remember the 100th anniversary of Armistice. Welcome back. Remembrance Day is a time for remembering those who fought and died for our freedom. Many young people have become members of the Army, Navy, or Air Cadets. They honor the sacrifice of the men who went to war, who they themselves sacrificed everything for their wives, sons, and daughters.
The Prince George Army Cadets are made up of young women and men, each with a common mission of reaching the public, but each with a different story to tell.
My great-grandfather was in the military. He fought in Vimy Ridge in World War I.
I wanted to be a cadet. I guess I've always had an interest in the military, and you know, I have relatives that were in the military, and my cousin was in it. He was a cadet, and he told me that I should join, and so I thought I'd come check it out, and I don't know, it seemed to be pretty cool.
I've always been kind of a military guy, always liked the military history and studying the warfares. Also, the cadets help with the community a lot.
England at 19 and never went back.
Longtime Captain Valerie Berge encourages young people to give cadets a try. She believes that the skills they learn here at the Connaught Youth Centre will benefit them in life.
It's a really rewarding experience for me to be working with the cadets because they're ages 12 to 19. Remembrance Day is important to me because my father was a World War II vet, and he was wounded in the war, so we watched him struggle with work in that because he had lost an eye.
Cadet Sergeant Tyra Dobbin had a very personal experience with the 100th anniversary of Vimy Ridge.
Just getting the experience to walk through the trenches and read the names of the people that were in those trenches fighting over 100 years ago, it was just an absolutely incredible experience.
By looking back, like these young cadets have, it can serve as a reminder that we should never stop remembering those who fought for us.
If we were to stop remembering, I think it would leave us all in a bad spot where we don't really appreciate the freedoms that were fought for us and the sacrifices that were given so that we could have the things that we have.
Rangers,
These cadets, one and all, believe what they do in the present is making a significant difference for the future. Corey Seller, CKPG News.
November 11th, 2018 marks the 100-year anniversary of World War I. Both Canada and Prince George have come a long way since the armistice was signed between Germany and the Allies that ended the First World War a century ago.
You tell students that, no, for instance, at the outset of the First World War, people weren't checking their phones for updates.
The 100th anniversary of the Great War, World War I. The war that allowed Canada to step out onto the world stage. The war that almost tore Canada apart. And the war that 100 years later still seems to matter to Canadians. Back in 1918, when the First World War was coming to an end, this community was just getting used to the name Prince George.
At the beginning of the war, this was still Fort George. You still had the existing two townships warring to be figuring out who was going to be the dominant community. And so by the time the boys started coming back home at the end of hostilities, they were coming to a fairly new community that during the war had begun to develop in ways that nobody had really predicted.
It's important to recognize the service and sacrifice made by thousands over the years. But there are many great things that came out of the First World War as well. There are films, plays, and novels, as well as Remembrance Day, the Poppy, and the 2 Minutes of Silence.
Those symbols represent more than just the First World War now. They represent all veterans who have served and lost their lives. And yet there's something deeply grounded in that First World War event when we stand there at the local cenotaph or at the National Monument and we reflect upon what these Canadians have done for us and their impact on our country.
It's very easy in present-day society to take peace, order, and governance for granted. Many believe the way things are now is the norm, and that this is the way it's always been.
Yet as I tell my students, they imagine it, the boys who went over to fight in World War I and World War II, they were 18 and 19 and 20 years old. They were very much the age of my contemporary first, second, and third year students. And you ask them the question, could you imagine doing that? And to them, it's bewildering. It's really a representation of the past as a foreign country. They just don't get it.
620,000 Canadians served in the First World War, which at the time was a country of 8 million people. Today's equivalent would be about 3.5 million Canadians going to war. Canada has come a long way in the last 100 years, and for that, the country will continue to remember those who sacrificed for us on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Olivia McDonald, CKPG News.
Coming up next, a local veteran shares his story of war. Remembrance Day has been observed by Canadians since the end of the First World War to remember all those who fought and died in the line of duty. November 11th is also a day when the veterans who walk among us have the opportunity to share their stories about serving our nation.
Days before Remembrance Day, Neil Boyes goes over the medals he's earned when he served for 22 years in the Canadian military. Some of that time was spent during the Gulf War.
I was running into the shelter. I happened to be right beside the door, and I looked up and I actually could see the Scud missile go flying right over top of our head. And I thought, it just got real.
Since the age of 15, Neil Boyes has participated in Remembrance Day events. Now retired from the military, the day is about celebration.
It's an amazing time. You get to see and exchange stories, and you get to hear things. We don't have any World War I vets anymore. There might only be a handful of World War II anywhere. Now the Korean vets are going. We're losing a lot of them, but we need to talk to these people. We need to learn from them. The vets that are still around. We need to talk to the ones that were in the Gulf War, the ones that are suffering the PTSD, and the ones that are suffering the Gulf War syndrome. We need to talk to our Afghan vets, and we need to be able to learn from them and hear their stories.
For Boyes, November 11th is an opportunity for the next generation to ask questions and create a dialogue with those who served.
If you've got kids, take them, let them talk to them. They're not going to hear blood-curdling stories where they'll have nightmares. They don't want to do that. That's not what it's about. It's about the camaraderie, the fellowship, the partnership.
During his first Remembrance Day celebration in Prince George, Boyes recalls a young boy approaching him from the crowd.
He gave me the biggest hug I think I've ever had, and he was crying. And he just said thank you, and then he let go of me and ran off to his mom, and his mom was crying, and I kind of went, thank you, you know, that's awesome, it's amazing, thank you very much, I appreciate that.
Residents not able to make the Remembrance Day ceremony, Boyes asked them to take a moment for an inner thought to think about those who have served and serving. Dave Branco, CKPG News.
Readjusting to civilian life is difficult for most veterans. PTSD, financial struggles, and difficulty finding housing are all common issues that veterans can experience. Support systems are available across the country, with the Royal Canadian Legion being one of the main veteran advocacy services.
The Royal Canadian Legion has been serving veterans since its formation in Winnipeg in 1925. The Legion advocates for the well-being of veterans and their families to ensure they are getting the support that they need.
It's important for us, the Legion speaks for veterans. That's all we do. That's our aim in life, is to speak for veterans and help veterans in any way we can do it.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old.
One of the biggest ways that the Legion is able to support veterans is through the Poppy Fund. The Poppy Fund is the money that is collected from selling poppies and can be used for anything that veterans need, whether it's a wheelchair or money to travel for a doctor's appointment.
The Poppy Fund actually is a very good one, because the money we raise from the community is kept in a trust fund, and it's only spent for veterans. We also do some things to the community that will affect the veterans too, like donations to the hospital, because veterans do use the hospital. And right now we're contemplating a donation to the Jubilee Lodge.
While some may think that the Legion is a group who endorses war, it is very much the opposite.
People think that we're pushing war, but actually we're pushing peace. Because if people can remember how awful war is, they maybe won't fight.
Across the country, the Royal Canadian Legion has over 250,000 active members. While membership used to be exclusive to veterans and their families, anyone can become a member. Melissa McKenzie, CKPG News.
Coming up next, we visit grade 2 students to see how they remember. Welcome back. If we do not remember the sacrifice of those 100,000 Canadian lives through a number of wars, the day would be meaningless. The lessons of Remembrance Day and its meaning start with some of the smallest students. Catherine Hansen visited a grade 2 class learning about why we will not forget.
Sam and Frida shared everything they had. Their blankets, their corned beef, which is a...
The lesson starts with a book.
Sam's first week at the front wasn't as bad as he thought it would be. But during his second week, when the attacks began, it was worse than he could have ever imagined.
And soon attention turns to a craft to be displayed for the entire school to enjoy.
Number 5, glue on the words. Cut out the words and glue them on.
The grade 2 students from Spruceland Elementary cut the green grass, glue the stems, and color their poppies.
We're making a poppy.
Do you know what your poppy stands for?
It's like when in the war, like when people die in the war, poppies grow next to their cross. It's for the soldiers who died.
And while cutting and creating, they remember.
I'm making a poppy so I can remember these guys that were saving our country. To remember the people that are in the war. It means that we remember the people who died to make Canada safe.
In the end, a beautiful reminder of what Remembrance Day means, and a reminder that no matter how young we are, we will not forget.
We will remember them.
Catherine Hansen, CKPG News.
Thank you for joining us for our CKPG News special, We Remember.